My name is Della Marsh. I am 64 years old. On Christmas Eve of last year, my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me everything was fine. 2 hours later, when he believed I was asleep in Harold's chair, he told the truth instead. I did not open my eyes. I kept my hands flat in my lap, and I listened to every word he said about my money, my house, and what he planned to do with both of them. 43 days later, in a glass-walled office at Midwest Trust Bank on High Street in Westerville, Ohio, my son found out what a woman does when she spent 31 years as a senior trust administrator reading the fine print on other people's estates. Welcome to Strong Mom Stories, where quiet women tell you exactly what happened at their own kitchen tables. If this sounds like your family, drop a comment and stay with me. There were 9 of us in the house on Clover Ridge Drive that evening. I have lived in that house since March of 1994. Harold and I bought it for $187,000 with a yard that backed up to a creek and a kitchen that smelled like the previous owner's cigarettes for the better part of a year. Harold died of a cardiac event in the fall of 2022. I have cooked Christmas Eve dinner alone every year since, because that is what you do when the alternative is sitting in a quiet house, listening to the furnace cycle on and off. My son drove up from Dublin with his wife and their son. My son is 44. He owns a landscaping and outdoor design company with 12 employees and a logo on the side of every truck. His wife is 39. She has a gift for making administrative decisions sound like kindnesses. I will come back to that. Their son, my grandson, is 20 years old and a junior at Ohio State studying finance. He has Harold's ears and Harold's habit of watching a room before he speaks in it. My daughter drove over from Cincinnati. She is 41. She works in hospital billing, and she has always been the one who tells me the truth about 3 days after it would have been useful to hear it. I cooked the brisket the way Harold always requested, low and slow, with the door sealed tight, and a bottle of dark beer poured in around noon. I made twice-baked potatoes and my mother's green bean casserole, which my daughter-in-law calls retro every single year in a voice that is meant to be charming. At 9:15, after the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren were on the sectional, watching something loud, I sat down in Harold's chair. It is a brown leather recliner, older than my grandson. The left armrest has a crack in it from the winter of 2018 when we kept the living room too dry and the leather split along the seam. I have never replaced it. I put my hand in that crack sometimes without meaning to. Old habits. I did fall asleep. I want to be honest about that. About 12 minutes, maybe 15. What woke me was my daughter-in-law's voice coming through the kitchen doorway, low and deliberate, the way someone talks when they have rehearsed what they are about to say. She won't question any of it, she said. She trusts us, that's all we need. I did not move. I have spent a career in rooms where people say things they do not expect to be repeated. I know how to be still. My son said something too low for me to catch. Then she said, the account access comes first, then the POA. Once the POA is in place, we can handle the rest from home. I heard the refrigerator open, ice in a glass. Then my daughter-in-law said the name of a senior living community in Powell, Ohio. I heard the words independent living and the March timeline. My son said, what about Lainey? She gets $20,000 when the estate settles. She's already agreed. A pause. Then my son said, and if Mom pushes back? She won't. Her voice was patient, almost gentle. She never checks. She just signs. I sat in Harold's chair with my hands in the pockets of the gray cardigan I have worn every Christmas since he died. 2 of the buttons are missing. In my right pocket, I carry a small notepad from the bank, the kind they used to put out at the branch for jotting account numbers. I have carried one in a pocket since 1993, old habit from the job. My grandson came in from the living room at 10:17 and said, too loud, is everyone staying or heading out? The kitchen went quiet. I let my mouth stay open slightly, the way sleeping people do. I heard my daughter-in-law come to the doorway and look at me for a moment. Then she went back and said to my son quietly, she's out. They returned to the living room 11 minutes later, cheerful and warm. My son sat on the arm of the couch and told a story about one of his crew driving a riding mower into a koi pond. Everybody laughed. I opened my eyes at 10:40 and asked for a glass of water and said the brisket had come out a little dry this year, which was not entirely true. They left at 11:30. My son hugged me the way he always does, from the shoulders, more of a lean than an embrace. I stood in the door and watched the taillights until they turned at the end of the cul-de-sac. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the notepad from my cardigan pocket and a pen and wrote one line. Deck 24, kitchen. POA, ACID access first. Powell Senior Living, March. Laney $20 K. She trusts us. That's all we need. Not a diary, a field note. I have kept field notes since I was 26 years old. You write what you observed and the time you observed it. You do not write how you felt. How you felt has never been admissible in any proceeding I have ever sat in. I went to bed at midnight. I slept fine. In the morning, I started making calls. Here is what my family believes I did for 31 years. They believe I was the nice woman at the bank who helped people open accounts and kept everything running smoothly. Here is what I actually did. In September of 1990, I was 29 years old, and I walked into Midwest Trust Bank on High Street and applied for an entry-level trust administration position. The man who interviewed me asked whether I knew what a successor trustee was. I told him I did, and I explained the difference between a revocable and irrevocable trust, the step-up in cost basis at death, and why a spendthrift clause matters in a discretionary distribution trust. He hired me before I finished the last sentence. I spent 31 years in that department. By the time I retired in 2021, I was senior trust administrator. I had personally administered 840 estate accounts. I had sat across the table from hundreds of families in the years after someone died, and I watched them try to understand documents they had never once read. I have seen a durable financial power of attorney used to drain a savings account in 11 days. I have seen a joint account designation transfer an entire estate to a caregiver who was named 6 weeks before the account holder died. I have seen the phrase, just a formality, used to describe documents that were anything but. My family thought I was the nice lady who balanced checkbooks. I am telling you this not to make myself sound impressive. I am telling you because it matters that they underestimated me, and it matters that I let them. That was my mistake, and I will come back to it. The first call I made on December 26th was to Jean, who worked with me in the trust department for 14 years, before she went to law school at 51 and became a trust and estate attorney in Worthington. I told her what I had heard in the kitchen. She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Is your revocable trust still the original from 2009, she said. I said yes. Another pause. And your son is still listed as sole successor trustee? Yes. Della, you need to come in. I already knew. When Harold and I drafted that trust in 2009, we were in our 40s and felt invincible, and the whole thing was theoretical. We named our son as successor trustee because we trusted him completely, the way you do when disaster still feels like something that happens to other families. After Harold died in 2022, I did not update the document. I kept telling myself I would get to it in the spring, then the fall, then after the holidays. 22 months passed. I taught people for 31 years to update their beneficiary designations after every major life event. Death of a spouse is the largest life event there is. I did not follow my own instruction, and I want to say that plainly. I have watched too many women my age blame only the people around them when the real story is more complicated than that. I drove to Jean's office on the 28th, and we sat at her conference table for 3 hours. The original trust named my son as sole successor trustee, with my 2 children as equal beneficiaries. My IRA still listed Harold as primary beneficiary. My checking and savings were individual accounts with no payable on death designation. By the time I left, I had a list of 7 things to do and 30 days to do them in. I will not give you the legal jargon, because what you need is not the terminology. You need to understand what matters. So here is what matters. In January, I amended the trust to add Jean as independent co-trustee with equal authority. I updated my IRA beneficiary to divide equally between my 2 children. I added a payable on death designation to my checking account. And I drafted a healthcare power of attorney, healthcare only, not financial, that referenced my primary care physician as the decision-making standard, not my son. I did not tell anyone. The person who speaks first gives away where the corner is. On January 8th, a Tuesday, my son came to the house at 4 in the afternoon with a folder under his arm and a kind of cheerfulness I have learned to recognize. He talked about the weather and my grandson's exam scores and a landscaping job he had finished in Upper Arlington. 14 minutes, I let him. Then he put the folder on the kitchen table and slid it toward me. "It's just some paperwork for the new year, Mom. To make things easier if something ever happened." I asked what it was. "A financial power of attorney, standard document." I asked him one question. "What does paragraph 4 on page 6 authorize?" He looked at me. He turned the folder around and searched for page 6. He found it. The paragraph authorized the agent, meaning my son, to make gifts from the principal's assets to any person, including himself and members of his own family. "That's just standard language," he said. "It's in every document like this." I told him I would read it and call him. He stood in my front doorway with his keys in his hand. "Don't overthink this, Mom. It's just paperwork." I told him I would try not to. I read all 8 pages that night in Harold's chair with the lamp pulled close. Pages 1 through 5 were the boilerplate I had seen 1,000 times. Page 6 had the gift-giving authority. Page 7 granted authority to change account beneficiary designations, the same designations I had quietly updated 2 weeks earlier. Page 8 was a provision releasing the agent from personal liability for any action taken in good faith on behalf of the principal. My son was asking me to sign away the right to hold him accountable for decisions made with my money. I put the document on the kitchen counter face down. I called Jean and read her pages 6, 7, and 8 out loud. She said, "You already handled 6 and 7. I said, "I know." She said, "Page 8 is why you cannot sign this document." I said, "I know that too." 2 weeks later, my grandson drove over on a Saturday morning with a case of Diet Coke I had not ordered, which is how I knew there was something he wanted to say. He stacked the cans in my pantry and then stood in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his hoodie pocket. He said his parents had already toured the facility in Powell. I said I was aware of the one in Powell. He looked at the floor. Then he said his mother had been asking him whether I seemed forgetful lately, whether I repeated myself. He said he had told her no, because I did not, and she had not seemed satisfied with that answer. I told him I had forgotten nothing. He nodded. He held his coffee mug with both hands, the way Harold used to when he was working something through. Then he said quietly, "They already spent it, Grandma, in their heads. They already spent it." I told him I understood. I poured us both coffee and asked him one thing only. "Are you all right?" He said he was trying to be. On the 14th of February, the phone rang at 8:20 in the morning. It was Kim, the branch manager at Midwest Trust on High Street. Kim started at the bank as a teller at 22. I trained her when she transferred to the trust department in 2004. She has managed that branch for 6 years now. "Della," she said, "your son came in yesterday. He said he was the authorized agent on your accounts." I asked what she had told him. That nothing was on file. He said he would bring documentation next week. A pause. "I thought you should know before he came back." I thanked her. I asked one more question. Had anyone else inquired about my accounts? She called back at 9:15. The week before my son came in, a man named Dane had called the branch. He identified himself as the family's financial advisor and asked about my IRA and whether it was accessible for estate planning purposes. Unauthorized inquiry into someone's financial accounts is never innocent curiosity. I said that sentence to new employees every year for a decade. I drove to the branch on a Monday morning and sat down in Kim's office. The glass walls looked out onto the teller line and the waiting area. I had sat in that same chair during a performance review in 1998. I told Kim everything, in order, the way I used to brief the compliance officer. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from us?" I told her. She added Jean as a co-notification contact on my accounts. Any request to modify ownership, beneficiary designations, or access would require a written confirmation from Jean within 48 hours. Not a legal instrument, a bank policy flag. Kim entered it into the system herself while I sat there. 2 days later, my son came in with the unsigned POA in a folder. Kim called me at 10:15. He's here. I drove to the bank. I parked and walked through the front door and sat down in Kim's office. 5 minutes later, my son came through the door with his wife. Her brother Dane was 2 steps behind, in a good coat, and his expression shifted the moment he saw me sitting at that table. Kim explained to my son that any change to account access required the account holder to be present. My son said that his mother was aware of everything and had agreed to this process. Kim looked at me. I said, "We haven't discussed this yet." The room got very quiet. My son set the folder on the desk. He said we had talked about it on January 8th and that I had agreed to think about it. I said I would read the document and call him. "That's the same thing, Mom." "It is not the same thing. In 31 years, I never once treated, 'I'll think about it,' as a signature." He said I was making something out of nothing. He said he was trying to help me. He said I was treating my own family like they were strangers. His neck had gone the color it goes when he feels cornered. His wife put a hand on his arm. Then he said, the thing he has said in some form or another, his entire adult life, the belief he has carried so long he has stopped noticing he is carrying it. "She trusts us. She's always trusted us. That should be enough." Nobody in that office said a word. Kim looked at the folder. Then she looked at my son. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I need to speak with your mother privately." He stood up. He looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to do this, Mom." Then he walked out. His wife followed. Dane walked out last and did not look back. When the door closed, Kim told me that Dane's inquiry from the previous week had been flagged by the compliance team. An unlicensed individual cannot solicit information about a depositor's accounts under the guise of family estate planning. She had submitted the incident report the day after she called me. Not because I asked her to, because it was, she said, what I used to tell the junior staff to do. I sat in that chair for a moment. Outside the glass, the teller line moved. The clock above the vault read 10:48. "Thank you," I said. "You taught me that one," Kim said. The power of attorney was never signed. A week after the bank, my son called me and told me the truth, the way people do when all the other options have run out. He and his wife had bought a rental property in Gahana in 2021 at a price they should not have paid. The loan had a balloon payment due in March of $87,000. They had been short for months and had told no one. He was not a bad person trying to steal from his mother. He was a frightened man who had decided that the fastest solution was already inside the family. He was wrong about the solution. He was not wrong to be scared. I told him that. I also told him, if he had driven to my house in October and sat at my kitchen table and said, "Mom, we are in trouble. Can you help us?" I would have listened. I do not know what I would have decided, but I would have listened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think you'd understand." I had administered the estates of 840 people. I had sat across from families in grief who had no idea what their parents' finances looked like, families who had trusted and not verified, and were now paying for it in probate court. I understood more than he had given me credit for. He said, "That's not what I meant." I know what he meant. I had been the woman who made the casserole and fell asleep in the chair. Not the woman who knew what page the liability release was on. He had not been paying attention to who I actually was for a very long time, and I had not corrected him. That is on both of us. They solved the Gahana situation on their own. They sold a car. They took a second mortgage at a rate that hurt. They made the March payment. It was hard, but it was manageable. It had always been manageable. The crisis had been real, but not the size they had built it into in the dark. My daughter called on a Sunday in early March. She cried in the long stretches with long silences between them that are particular to her. She told me she had signed a handwritten agreement in November. One page, drafted by her sister-in-law, stating she supported the plan and would assist with placement. In exchange, she would receive $20,000 once the estate was reorganized. She had already spent $8,000 of it, borrowed from her own savings in anticipation. I sat with the phone in my hand. I thought about her at 4 years old in the hallway during a thunderstorm. The socks with the frog print, unable to sleep, unless she could see the hall light from her bedroom door. Then she took a breath and said, "But you should still think about planning, Mom. You know you should." I said I had been planning since before she was born. I told her she is welcome in my house every day of the year. She may bring a store-bought pie. She may not bring a document. Not ever for the rest of my life. She said that wasn't fair. I told her it was the fairest thing I had said in 4 months. She hung up. She called back the next morning. She is coming for Easter, and we do not discuss the rest of it. In April, Jean filed the amended trust with the county probate court, and I mailed a certified copy to each of my children with a 3-paragraph cover letter in plain language. It explained what I had, how it was held, who was named to each role, and what my intentions were. No surprises. Everything visible. Every question answerable by reading the page. My son called me about the letter. He said putting it all in writing like that felt cold. I said, "We're family. That's why I put it in writing." He was quiet. Then he said his back was better than mine and that he could carry the brisket in from the garage refrigerator at Christmas if it was getting too heavy for me. I said that would be fine. Here is what I want to say about my own part in this. I let Harold's name sit on that IRA for 22 months after he died because updating it made the paperwork real in a way I was not ready for. That is the truth. I told myself I was busy, then tired, then waiting for the right moment. I was a woman who had spent 3 decades telling other people not to let this exact situation happen. And I let it happen to myself. A document you avoid reviewing is not kindness. It is not generosity. It is avoidance wearing a quieter coat. If Harold had known, he would have laughed at me the way he laughed every April when I triple-checked the tax return. He would have said, I measured everything in the world except my own reluctance to grieve. He would not have been wrong. My grandson came by in late April to return a casserole dish and to study at my kitchen table the way he used to in high school. He is taking a trust and estate law elective this semester. He showed me the syllabus. I recognized 3 of the case studies. Before he left, I went to the desk in the back room and took out a book. Harold's paperback copy of The Millionaire Next Door. The spine broken at chapter 4, his handwriting in the margins in pencil. He had read it 3 times. His last note was on page 211, written the year before he died. Still true. I put it in my grandson's hands. He turned it over and read the back and looked at me. Keep it, I said. Read the margin notes first. He did not make a joke. He put it carefully in his bag and carried it out to the car. I watched from the doorway until he backed out of the driveway. I want to tell you one more thing before we go. The phrase I heard in my kitchen on Christmas Eve, she trusts us, that's all we need. I have heard some version of it for 31 years, not always from family. Sometimes from strangers in conference rooms, talking about someone who was not present to hear it. It is always said by people who have confused trust with permission. They are not the same thing. Trust is what you give a person when they have earned it over time. Permission is what you put in writing so that no one has to guess what it covers and where it ends. I trusted my son, I still do. That is exactly why I wrote everything down. Harold's chair is still in the living room. I sit in it in the afternoons now with the lamp on and a book on my knees, or sometimes nothing at all, just the sound of the neighborhood, the furnace, the occasional car going slowly past the window. I keep the notepad in my cardigan pocket. Old habit from the bank. Because the clearest thing you can give the people you love, and the clearest protection you can give yourself, is a piece of paper that says exactly what you meant. That is my story. 1 amended trust, 2 updated beneficiary forms, a bank call I was ready to receive, and a chair I do not fall asleep in anymore. If this reminded you to check your own paperwork, do it this week. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.